wide, this seemed a crime to me. It was the drive to rescue what my father had left behind that sent me to Poland on a Fulbright for 2 years, just before the fall of the Iron Curtain, and then later to his birthplace, now in Belarus, to search the stories and fates of the Balgley family in archives there. Later, I found my relatives living in Israel and Germany, and some in the United States, whom I had not known existed. I wanted to bring back the story to my father and to my siblings, to share a history of which we should be proud, a story at once powerful and fragile. Maybe my father and I had our closure before he died. It was a St. Patrick's Day. We were in California at a place called the Abbey Pub, where we each had a beer. He by now in a wheelchair, me by his side. He pondered silently for a moment and then remarked on the strange miracle that his long discarded Jewishness should come back to him in the form of his second daughter, when he said, "You're a lot braver than I ever was. An entirely new door opened for me." Now I'm going to go to a description of the event that I think began this, like I say, unbidden, unasked for feeling in me to search out this identity. It's at my grandparents' home in Brooklyn when I'm about 8 years old, so this is 1960. It's where Bashir really took hold. It's before I knew what the word meant, but this is where it started. Brooklyn, 1960. An uncharacteristic bath in the middle of the afternoon, and upstairs in the Catanzaro house, that's the Italian relatives my mother's, the O'Hara's, married into, not in the usual basement set tub, a scratchy, fancy nylon ensemble, what we children derisively called a dressy dress. These marked something unexpected one day. My cousin looked up at me descending the stairs from the bathroom and said in her best snotty voice, "Where do you think you're going?" I did not know that was a thing. I only knew that I was to be clean and dressed up as on a holiday. From the familiar set tubs and the dining room of the Catanzaro house that had now become like a second home to me, I only was told I was going to a place called Brooklyn. The trip for my mother's family on Long Island to Brooklyn, the home of my father's parents, might as well have been from one planet to another. Along the Belt Parkway, past the ships in lower New York Harbor, past Fort Hamilton, glimpsing the bridge connecting Brooklyn to Staten Island, past Fort Hamilton, Manhattan's lower skyline, which boasted the famous aquarium in the Battery, away from Catanzaro's and O'Hara's, away from rooms of Catholic icons, Celtic crosses, and miniature shrines of serene Italian white china Madonnas, to a place entirely new and mysterious for me. You park in a crowded street, but one lined with remarkably large trees. You walk to the porch of the old Brooklyn brownstone apartment building. You do not walk in yet, but wait for the heavy door to seemingly unlock itself, and find my dark, mustachioed grandfather, the so-called super of the building, and I later learned its owner. Just behind him, but not for long, my grandmother followed, an imposing presence who clearly ruled the roost. Appearing much larger than my grandfather, she greeted us. With the sound of her voice, I had a memory of their visit to our Cranford, New Jersey home. You have to read the book to find out about that. And I blanched at the memory of what I had done with the pepperoni my grandfather gave me that day. I was also transfixed. She turned to my grandfather and in quick Yiddish directed him to open the door of their bottom floor apartment. We were in the building's hall. And as we entered, there before me was the heavy wooden furniture in a darkened room, ostensibly to keep cool from the bright afternoon. As my eyes, losing my place here, as my eyes adjusted, objects coming into focus, a burnished samovar, an old silvered menorah, small rooms, large furniture. They had lost another bigger home in the Depression, and these must have been remnants from its day. A profusion of newspapers, a table already set with steaming food, and the directive, "Come, eat," delivered not once, but punctuating many times the duration of our stay, long after I thought mealtime had finished. Then my grandmother led the way to another room where sunlight fought through nearly closed louvered doors. The shuttered door opened, heat hitting us first, blinded by the sun, then eyes adjusting once again. There it lay, my grandmother's magnificent garden, lush in the middle of a cement enclosure, vegetables and flowers mixed together with no prejudice for one or the other. She grasped my mother's arm and in that deeply, differently cadenced English observed, "Don't we live on the smell of pepper plants? Feel we could eat the daffodil?" Many years later, I learned that she and her 4 children relied for survival entirely on the food she grew in a garden in Brest on the Polish-Russian border. Unlike the visits to my mother's family, which were typically protracted, unbounded by the clock, more like time spent at home where one did not have to hurry, since bags were unpacked and toothbrushes were in the medicine cabinet, here there was already in the air the sense of departure, of a set period of time now concluding. Formal, unfamiliar, odd, like before with the pepperoni, but this time a new, unexpected emotion roiled inside me. Enchantment. But in place of the pepperoni that had repulsed me, as we prepared to depart, a silver dollar was placed into my hand by my grandfather. I did not recognize it as money. It instead seemed akin to the golden-wrapped, chocolate-covered cherries that sat in a silver bowl on the table in the darkened dining room. Like the D'Angelos and the Catanzaros, my parents were exotic, yes, but with the other families, I stood apart. I was an interested observer. But here, now, this was about me. That feeling was new, and it overtook me suddenly. In an uncanny way, during that visit, I remembered what I had never seen. I said nothing to my parents about that sensation, but I knew something had happened. I cannot actually explain it today, but it was a mysterious transformation. I was in an unknown place that I somehow knew. Although I knew I could not comprehend it, that experience began the discovery of my own exoticism, my own otherness, and because it was mine, unlike the D'Angelos and the Catanzaros, it hit me with remarkable force. I could not know then that I was beginning a journey that would take me to the villages of my grandparents' and father's birth. I could not know then that my father had early in his life abandoned his Jewishness, shed not only his religion, but also his Jewish identity, kept it hidden. And I was to hold it against him, my sense of his not owning himself, and thus my ignorance of my own identity, my inherited sense of a larger metaphoric displacement. Later in my life, I was to feel the full force of Beshirt, a word I could not have known as a child in my grandparents' Brooklyn apartment, and in a dramatic way I could not have predicted then.